Our reading from the Rays of One Light this week is week 17. How high should we aspire? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 5. I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says only a few verses later, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here then was the self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to his disciples, in the image you project towards others. Don't be satisfied with a goodness born merely of ego definition. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue in the realization of God alone as the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 7th chapter, yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find that man who saith, all is Vasudev. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Our topic today is how high should we aspire? And Swami, I'll open today with a passage from the essence of the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. And I'll close with the whispers because the whispers kind of encapsulates the whole talk in about 2 beautiful lines. So Swami says, and I was thinking of this question, and when I saw this line, I thought it was perfect, because he says the spiritual path is full of apparent contradictions. Yogananda told the story of a master who said to a disciple, you should eat and you should not eat. And the disciple, of course, objected and says, Master, what you've said seems self-contradictory. Of course, the master replies, the contradiction is in your understanding. My advice is sound. You should feed your body healthfully to keep it alive and well, but you must resist the thought born of ego, I am eating. Tell yourself rather, God is eating through me. And Master is referring to the highest aspiration, which is to feel that God is the doer. But of course, it's a whole journey to get to that point where when you recognize that God is the doer, let alone then making that connection to feel that God is actually living through you. So how do we get there? The evolution of the soul, which we revisit every Sunday with the Festival of Light, and if you pay attention to the speakers when we share, many of us revisit the evolution in our own talks every Sunday because we have to understand where we started and where we're going to make sense of it all. But there's this journey in the spectrum of aspiration, because aspiration, or the desire to expand, to aspire, is inherent in our evolution. So you can look at the microorganism that starts to replicate itself. No one is telling the organism, replicate yourself, build a community of cells. It's just inherent in its design. And then we evolve and we come to maybe a rock, or a diamond or an emerald, and it may reflect the light and the beauty of God, but maybe it's not necessarily aspiring to anything consciously yet. And then something funny starts to happen when you get to a plant and a tree, and Swami says it beautifully. He says, expansion is visible everywhere, in life bursting out of little seeds and growing to maturity, in the expanding rings of a tree trunk, in the spreading of a forest, in life's urge for self-propagation. Aspiration is also visibly expressed in the plants as they reach toward the sun and explore the potentials for beauty in the flowers. So it becomes more visible when you see the plant in your house and it's leaning towards the window. There must be more sun this way because everyone's over here in the audience today. But then you move from that plant to perhaps an animal, and again, still there's degrees of aspiration. There's the animals with lower consciousness that, it's all the first chakras. It's eat and propagate. And then there's the horse and the cow. The horse already has the desire to be fast and to be the fastest. I don't know if you've ever watched horse racing movies. We watch a lot of those at my house, but I'm like, how does that horse, it wants to win. Nobody's telling it you're going to get a trophy. That's not its desire to get a trophy, but it is its desire to expand. It has that impulse. And then you see an animal like a cow that has an instinct to nurture, to take care of its young. And even dolphins, I remember watching something and they were showing, that dolphins make this particular sound when they're grieving the loss of, one of its children. And so we start to see the consciousness of evolution, but also, again, an impulse to grow, to be more, to strive for something bigger than ourselves. And so perhaps after millions of lifetimes, we get to the human stage, and along that comes the ego. But with the ego, that contradiction, it's also tied to the potential for conscious, higher, divine aspiration. So, as we go through perhaps the cycle of ages, the yugas, from the dark ages into the higher ones, maybe we started as, even before a warrior, maybe the instinct was to protect your family, to protect your tribe, and then it expanded, protect my country and my land. But somewhere in that evolution, there begins this identity crisis, because the the desire to protect, for example, to protect your family, could be a natural impulse of the soul to care for others. But then the soul is getting filtered by the ego, and it starts to say, I protect, but I protect only my family, or I look out for only my tribe. And that's where the identity crisis starts and the pitfalls start. And we were actually talking about it this morning with our friend Freddie, and we were laughing how we have that impulse. It's a natural impulse to help, to serve, and then it gets muddied. And he was sharing how he was serving in the army in his country, and they were going into to Honduras, I believe it was, And, again, it maybe started out as protect this land. And then, he says something funny really happened when we crossed over. All of a sudden it was like, oh, we're this powerful army. Maybe we should keep going. And it's like the sickness gets in, the greed gets in, and we start to move away from that impulse that was actually necessary and pure. But again, it got muddied with the ego. And the thing about the ego is that it's self-feeding. So like Freddie stepping into new land, he says, oh, maybe I want more. And then there's the desire for more and more, but it's insatiable. Nothing ever fulfills that. No amount of money, no amount of material things can fulfill that. And so, through grace, perhaps we start to, through the failures and the anguishing monotony, we start to listen more to that pure impulse again. And we start to move towards divinity and we start to explore it, but always in some way, we're still inspired by the ego. It's still filtered through the ego until it's not. So there's a contradiction in saying how high should we aspire, because aspiration is of the ego until it's anchored in God. And that's why, for example, maybe we've gotten to the point of being a warrior in our lifetimes, and now we're the yogi or the Brahmin, and we're seeking to dedicate our lives to God. But in a way, that's where the trickier pitfalls even start to come in. And that's what the reading was about today. Jesus is not pointing at, for lack of a better word, a couch potato and saying, look, don't have that person's aspiration. He's pointing to the Pharisees and the scribes, these people dressed in their whites or dressed in their blues, and he's saying, don't just look the part. Be perfect in your consciousness. And it gets trickier, I feel, and more subtle the moment that divine aspiration is really conscious, because now we're kind of back and forth between the darkness and the light, and the fight is happening. But despite the fact that, the ego gets the best of us, it's worth looking at whether we're still demonizing it. Because whether we like it or not, it's our partner in this lifetime. It's how we're getting back to God. And without it, we'd be back in a different stage of development. We'd be an animal. So we need the ego. And it's about how we can work with the ego. You can just think of it as your partner, for example, or your team member. How do you get to accomplishing the goal if you're fighting your team member the whole time? So at some point, we need to learn to cooperate with it. And how do we cooperate with the ego? How do we befriend it so that we can ultimately transcend it? Is first acknowledging that it's there, that it exists, but knowing it intimately, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. And just as the affirmation on humility stated, we need to be honest with ourselves about who's showing up, what aspects of ourselves are showing up in certain situations, so that we can look out for that guy, in future situations. We have that conversation with our kids all the time. We say, who are you letting rule the kingdom? Are you letting this citizen rule, the one that's, still in these lower chakras about me and mine and my friends and whatever that is? Or are you handing over the reins to your higher qualities? So first, acknowledging your ego, knowing through daily introspection and self-honesty how that ego manifests itself. And then there's the process of turning the energy upwards, so redirecting those qualities. And it's always, I don't know why this one always comes to mind when I think about redirecting the ego, but I had this slightly competitive drive. And at first it was frustrating to lose or to not achieve something. And then at some point I had a lot of fun competing with Dharana, because I realized Dharana doesn't care about winning. He's just being. Whether he wins or not is not the point. He's just being. But it helped me redirect that energy. So it started being really fun for me to go, okay, I'm going to compete with Dharana. But really what I was getting to was, I'm going to try my best. And so we go from competing, for example, to I'm going to try my best, to getting to the point where I'm just doing my best and I don't have a story about it. It's not about me. It's not about the results. So first acknowledging and then working to turn those lower tendencies into higher qualities. And then 3 would be to start to feed your soul's aspiration. We're here because we've already caught a glimpse of something that's more permanent, something more fulfilling. And instead of simply trying to tend to the lower qualities, why not energize those positive things in our life that are going to help us get to seeing God as doer? So we all know what those are: keeping right company, meditating, chanting, reading about the saints, and even learning about the pitfalls of the saints. What about learning, the nuances? What happens when you're so close? It's just, why have to learn it ourselves? We have all these examples, and that's why having a guru, having a teacher is so important, but also the humility to be able to learn from others is important. So beginning to feed our soul aspirations so that we awaken that desire. And there's a beautiful note that Swami gives in the essence of the Gita, where he says that the need is not so much to develop love for God as to receive his love, to recognize love and joy as supremely relishable and therefore the only thing in life worth having. But it's interesting because he's saying we don't even need love for God to get to God. You don't need to try. You just simply first need the desire for having that joy that doesn't go away, for a love that doesn't betray you, for a peace that doesn't leave when something happens. You just need that desire for joy or for peace first. And naturally, like in the chant that we sang, all the lights light themselves. You're not doing anything. It's a process that's happening naturally. And so, lastly, we are essentially becoming perfect channels. We're trying to cultivate the attitude of becoming the perfect channel. And In a way, you could say that the highest aspiration is to forget that we're aspiring, or rather to give it to God as the doer. And there's a beautiful story that we were actually just listening to in Swami Kriyananda's last Sunday service, his Easter service. He shared a story about a Sufi saint, and it's Saint Rabia and her disciples, and they're discussing how to know if someone is a true lover of God. And one of her disciples says, "He is not worthy of God unless he is able to suffer for him." And the saint replies, "Much more than this is needed." The second disciple said, "He is not a true lover of God who is not happy to suffer for God." And she says, also, this seems a little bit egoic. So they asked her, "Well, then you tell us, who is a true lover of God?" And she responds, "He is a true lover of God who forgets suffering in contemplation of his joy and love." So, in another way, we could say the true lover of God finally forgets their aspiration in contemplation of his joy, or in simply serving God and others. The moment we're caught in the idea that we are aspiring, we're already creating that separation. The moment we think, I need to be kind, I need to forgive, I need to serve, we're limiting ourselves to our little love, instead of asking God, which is a tricky one, God, forgive through me. God, love through me. I don't know, I still ponder it many times. I'm like, I really need to forgive this person and get over it. And I'm like, I don't know that I have the capacity to do that. Maybe I should just make my life easier and ask Divine Mother to love this person through me. And with that, I would like to close with a prayer from Whispers. O Divine Father, be thou the captain of the ship of my daily struggles. Bring it safely to the shore of final fulfillment. Just to comment quickly, he's not saying, God, make me the best boat, make me the best boatman, give me the strongest muscles. Master's giving us the attitude for true aspiration. Father, be thou the captain. We've been steering our boats for lifetimes, and it's time to hand the boat over to God.